Hey guys, what is up? Super K Man Rocks here, and we're here for my LCK week number 2 overview and analysis video here in the spring split. Very excited to get into it. We're really starting to get a good idea of what these teams are looking like as the season is starting off here in the LCK. We're going to be through 4 full series from all 10 of our teams, and that will definitely give us a good idea whether or not teams are living up to expectations or not. Even a couple of changes this week. Very interested in looking at it, but I would love to know what you guys think of all of the LCK action down in the comment section below. What series was your favorite this week? What teams are really impressing you or maybe not impressing you in ways that you maybe weren't expecting? I would just love to hear all your thoughts on the LCK down in the comments. Of course, if you want to check out my thoughts and opinions on everything LCK that's happened up until this point this year, the link to the LCK playlist is going to be in the iCard right now. You can check that out if you are interested. But today, we're going to be going over the series, the 10 series, I should say, across 5 days from week number 2 in the LCK. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. If you are new here, what we do on this channel is we're going to go series by series talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate in each game that they played. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover. At the end of the week, I will tie everything into a nice, neat little bow by giving you my player of the week and my dud of the week for the entirety of week number 2, as well as updating my power rankings after the first 2 weeks of action. So let's jump right into it, starting, of course, with day number 1. We kicked day 1 off in week number 2 with the matchup between FearX and Hanwha Life Esports that Hanwha Life was able to pick up a win in. They are 6-0 to start the year, and basically everything you could have wanted to see out of this team at the start of the year has kind of come to fruition at the current moment. You were really hoping that this team could be an LCK title contender, and at least from what we've seen so far, it's been a pretty good ride. Obviously, not a very tough schedule, but 6-0 is exactly how you would want to start your 2024 for FearX on the other side. This team is fine. I mean, we know what they are. They're a bottom, 4 or 3 teams, somewhere in that range. I had them at number 7 just because there are a lot of bad teams in the LCK right now, and I think FearX is certainly one of them. They're very much a part of the bottom 5 that I think people associate, top 5, bottom 5, that kind of thing. They're fine, but they're never going to be on the same level as a team like Hanwha Life, and I think that was very clear in a series like this. Player of the series for me is going to go to Zeka in the mid lane. This was not a difficult decision. Both the Corki and the Tristana games were very good. Closer got Azir in both of these games, a champion that he's played a lot of. It's not necessarily the thing that you think about when you think of Closer. You think more of the assassins, you think more of the aggressive picks that can kind of dominate in terms of kills early. That's not really what Azir offers, but Zeka made Closer look completely outclassed in a series like this. And, we'll get to Closer in a bit, but this is not a particularly surprising outcome to anybody who has followed this channel. I don't think that these two mid laners are on similar playing fields, and I think Zeka definitely proved that. Zeka's a player who gets so much hate, man. He gets so much pushback from the community for being inconsistent when I just don't think I necessarily see that. I've never really seen the inconsistencies. Obviously, Zeka has been one of the founding channel darlings of this channel in the first place. It was him and it was Cream in the LPL. They were the two where I was just like, why are we not talking about these guys more? And, it's really good to see him continue to progress, and I think he's really become, pretty consistently one of the best mid laners in the world over the past couple of years. Really nice series from him, but I think you could give this to basically anybody. Doran was awesome in game number 2 on the Rumble. That champion is in a pretty strong state. I think we can all agree on that right now, and he dominated Clear in this, series just in general in both game 1 and game 2. Clear is not looking good at the LCK level right now, and Doran really kind of took advantage and capitalized on that. Viper and Delight look like a phenomenal bot lane 2v2 duo. Nobody's particularly surprised by that. Lucian hasn't been working so much in the West, but in the East, it's actually been super good. A lot of teams like to play for the mid-game power spikes, like to play for these 3v3 skirmishes around objectives in the mid-game, and Lucian's very good for those. That's kind of the strength of him as a champion, and so it's good to see a player like Viper be able to capitalize on that. Delight is awesome, and Peanut is amazing. He continues to be maybe one of the most underrated players in the world, because you just can't tell me the last time Peanut was genuinely a bad player. The worst year of Peanut's career was probably the year he went to World Finals, and that should give you an idea of just how good Peanut is as a player. So, generally HLE is very stacked. They should be able to take down a team like FearX without a ton of trouble, and that's exactly what they did here. But for Fox on the other side, I mean, they are what they are. Like, this isn't really a surprising outcome. I'm not really shocked by the fact that they weren't particularly good in this series. Dud of the series is going to go to Willer in the jungle, but, I mean, theoretically, you could give it to anybody, basically with the exception of Execute. I think Execute actually played pretty well in this one. I still like him a lot as a player. A lot of those hooks in game number 1 were really solid. Some of those Renata ultimates movements in game 2 were also pretty good. It just didn't really matter. Nobody was ever going to be able to follow up with any sort of damage or aggressive move to try and keep the game close. It didn't really matter what plays he was making. Everybody else on the team basically capitulated from moment 1 into the series. Willer does get done of the series because of just how little he ended up accomplishing. Peanut's very good at being able to stop enemy junglers, controlling the tempo of the game, slowing the pace down, and allowing his laners to win. He made Willer's life a living nightmare in this series, whether it was the Poppy or the Maokai. You know, Willer went for some aggressive things. He went for the Viego, he went for the Lee Sin, he went for things that really wanted to try and carry games with some, you know, good macro and aggressive plays, and he just never got any of them off. One KDA in this series, or I guess KA in this series. 1 assist, no kills. He was involved in 1 kill the entire series. It's just miserable if you are a jungler. Really not good stuff coming in from Willer, but Closer got completely outclassed in the mid lane. Like I said, Clear was really bad in the isolated top lane matchup, just did not compete with Doran even a little bit. And while Doran is one of the best top laners in the world, Clear, you know, has all this potential and promise, and this team obviously wanted to invest in him going into this year, and it's just not working out for them. He has been bad in basically every series that they've played. Fox feels like a mediocre team at absolute best. I really don't think this is a team that's going to be able to compete for a top 5, maybe even top 6 spot. Like, I don't even think it's in the cards for a team like Fox. Maybe they are a bit better than the worst teams in the league, like Bro, but are they ever even going to be on the same playing field as, like, anybody in the top 5? It just doesn't feel like it after a series like this. And HLE is very much a top 5 team, a top 3 team, in my opinion. It very much feels like a top 3 in the LCK right now in terms of consistency. HLE is definitely a part of that. The 6-0 start definitely enables that, but generally their schedule is going to get a lot harder as we continue to go through the next couple of weeks. They've had it pretty easy to start this split. It's definitely not going to get easier from here, but so far they've passed every test that they've been asked. And then moving on to our second series here of day number 1, and this is a really fun one to talk about. It's the Kwangdong Freecs taking on KT Rolster. And KDF picks up their first series win of the year with a 2-1 win over previously a very fun and strong team in week number 1 in KT Rolster. And you know I get some criticism sometimes for sounding like I say like I told you so too much on this channel, or calling back to things that, you know, I think I got right, or things that I think I got wrong, you know, just calling back to previous opinions, calling out what other people's opinions are, etc., etc. I think I do a lot of that because to me, it's important to recognize when the analysis you make is correct and incorrect. It's important to recognize what you did that was correct and what you did that was incorrect so you can adapt and move into the future. And this is, fortunately for me, one of those cases where this is one of the more telling that I know what I'm talking about series that we could possibly have. Not only did Taiyun come out and Bull immediately came in, who's not even a very good LCK Challengers League player. Let me be entirely honest with you. Bull has been struggling in Challengers League for a while, but already it feels like a pretty big upgrade. We'll talk about that, but you know, I was talking about KT last week and saying, yes, I'm really happy that this team started 2-0, but as somebody who watched 2022 DRX and was a really big fan of that team, there's no way that they don't go 0-2 next week. That's just what this team does. That's what Pioshik and Barrel are masters of, is 2-0, 0-2, 2-0, 0-2. It's just kind of what they do over the course of everything. Obviously, they haven't gone 0-2 yet. We'll see what happens the rest of this week, but I'm not shocked to see KDF winning this with the change that they made. This is a pretty predictable outcome, at least in my eyes. Not the upset that I think a lot of people kind of saw it as. And, you know, I think it's good to acknowledge that I think the process is working so far in a lot of regions, but specifically here in this particular instance. Let's talk about what specifically happened in these 3 games, though. KT was obviously able to take game number 1. Deft looked awesome when he was playing Senna. This is a champion that I think is just really strong, either in AD carry or in support right now. It really doesn't matter what happens. You know, we'll see that in game 2 once Andil gets a chance to play it in the support position for KDF. Senna is just in a really good spot, but after that, it was the Bull show in the bot lane for KDF. He's going to get player of the series, and like I said, this is a bit surprising even for me. As much as I was low on Taiyun and saying he was the reason that this was not a playoff team, you know, I was still sitting there being like, well, I don't know who you bring in. Like, Bull is not the answer, in my opinion, or at least he wasn't the answer. This is a guy who has languished in the Challengers League for like 3 straight years at this point. Really has never been able to separate himself as anything other than a slightly average to below average AD carry at that level. I was really not expecting him to be able to come in and actually, you know, go up against Deft and Barrel and Pioshik and be able to, you know, dominate in his first series, but they caught KT on a good week, and in, he was amazing in these two games, specifically in game number 3, where he really did dominate on the Kalista. He is player of the series for a reason. It's not just because the team got better. When he subbed in, he was the one that they were playing through. He was making some amazing plays. His positioning was super good. This is genuinely the 2 best games that I've ever seen Bull play, and that's a really fun thing to be able to say. The Jhin was great, the Kalista was great, everything you wanted to see out of him ended up coming to fruition in this one, which is awesome. I think Kwangdong also played great. Like I said, the Senna in game 2, super fun to watch. That champion is just in a ridiculous state on this patch at the current moment. When you're able to slow the game down and play her in the way that she's supposed to be played, it's just really hard to beat her at her own game. And yeah, as Senna, you can basically force the game to be played, you know, your way, especially with a Jhin and a Rumble and a Vi. Like, you have so many options here to just allow Senna to do whatever she wants on the map. So really strong champ. And then obviously the Renata in game 3 was also really good. I think the top side of the map was great. Dudu was phenomenal in this series. I can only praise Dudu enough. I mean, I spent an entire year last year in 2023 just talking about him every single time KDF played a game. He was amazing. He was certainly better than perfect in this one. Bulldog looked a lot more energized and reinvigorated even on some of these more late game carries. The more aggressive version of him did seem to be back a bit. And Cuz was going for a lot of engages. This team was playing to win. They weren't playing to scale. And I think that was a really impressive thing from KDF. Nice win. Great job getting your first win of the season. And honestly, it's a pretty big one. I'm interested to see where this team goes from here, because at least for now, a lot of the excitement has kind of brought itself back into Kwangdong after, I think there was hesitation at the beginning of the year because of this bot lane. And then for KT Rolster, again, what can I say? This isn't a particularly surprising outcome. This is just kind of what Pyosik, Deft, and Beryl, specifically Pyosik and Beryl, do, is they're going to have good series, they're going to have bad series. And, you know, there were good moments and bad moments in this series for sure. Deft was amazing in game number 1 on the Senna. I mean, Senna-Ornn as a bot lane combo is very difficult to deal with, and Deft, I think, positioned around it really well. Beryl played really well in game number 1. You had some options coming in from BDD on the Orianna. Just generally a really strong start to the series, but the final parts of the series were really bad from the bot lane. That Draven Pike game in game 3 was awful. Deft was really bad on the Draven, just way too far forward, not respecting his opponents really at all. I understand that you want to try to match the Kalista in the early game so that you can get that snowball going, but it was just way too much. Deft was like uncharacteristically bad in that third game. Pyosik was not a good Maokai. He's really never been a great Maokai player, and that definitely showed itself in that third game. But dud of the series for me as a whole is going to go to Perfect in the top lane. He just had zero impact. The Jax was awful in game 3, but the Udyr was also awful. Even in game 1, it really didn't feel like he was accomplishing all that much. I like Perfect, but Dudu outclassed him, very heavily isolated in that 1v1 matchup. You're going to need to see this more volatile, more aggressive top lane player start to develop that consistency. There were a lot of good takeaways from Perfect in week number 1, but there were also moments where it's like, okay, you need to settle down and chill out a little bit. This isn't the Challengers League where you can get away with some of these plays, and I think that became abundantly clear to him in this series. I think generally, you know, KT's still a good team. I still feel confident in them, but, you know, like, there are concerns about this roster. There are concerns about whether or not they're going to be able to compete with the top 3 teams. And I think, you know, games like this are the reason why, where the inconsistencies definitely start to show themselves. This team has ridiculously high highs, and we know what they look like when they're playing well, but it's not just always about what a team looks like when they're playing well. It's also about what a team looks like when they're playing poorly. It's going to be interesting to see what happens the rest of this week. And then for KDF, awesome rebound here. Bull looks incredible. Obviously, this is the direction that you're going to keep going in, you know, for now at the very least, but the top side's always been a strength for this team. Dudu's amazing. I think Bulldog can grow into a really nice carry role. Cuz is a very experienced, very good player playing against his former org in this series. If the bot lane is serviceable at the very least, and if they're great like they were in this series, like KDF, what's stopping them from being a top 5 team in the LCK? I mean, truly, that's the kind of talent that they have if everything can work out here. This is basically the perfect bounce back from what was a horrendous week number 1. And then moving on to day number 2 now, and we get to kick day number 2 off with a pretty uneven series, I'll say at the very least, between Dplus KIA and NS RedForce, and DK obviously was able to take this one, but man, even I wasn't predicting this to be such a blowout, such an unclose series. I mean, 4 kills over the course of the series for NS just in general, not very good, man. This is not what you want to see from a team that honestly overperformed in week number 1. They looked competent. They beat DRX, who at the very least is an interesting team, even if they're not a particularly good one right now. You know, you had players like Jiwoo and Call Me actually looking pretty good. Peter as well, actually looking pretty good in week number 1. So I was kind of interested to see what they would be able to do against a genuinely good team like DK. And unfortunately, it's just a little bit out of their depth right now. This more so felt like the NS of last year, the team that I put at number 10 in my power rankings to kick off the year for the LCK. For DK on the other side, obviously this is awesome. This is a great win for them. You're really not going to freak out about anything here. This is everything you could have wanted to see out of this team and then some, specifically because it was Showmaker popping off, getting a pentakill on the Kassadin in game number 2, playing these more aggressive assassins. So, you know, one of them isn't even particularly meta at the current moment. And of course, the Kassadin getting really good help from the engagers, from everybody else on the team. This was just kind of everything you could have wanted to see out of DK. A lot of people have been waiting for a performance like this from Dplus KIA for some time. So let's talk about it. Player of the series, no doubt, it's going to go to Showmaker in the mid lane. I'm a lot higher on Showmaker's, 2023 and 2022 than I think other people are. I think generally you're going to hear that he's just been whatever over the past couple of years. I certainly don't agree with that. I think inconsistently he has been phenomenal for this team. There were stretches like I talked about in these weekly reviews last year where like he would have 2-3 week stretches where it's like, this is one of the best players in the world. This is the Showmaker we all remember. He just wouldn't be able to keep it up for more than 2 or 3 weeks at a time. He would go another week or two and really not be all that great. It was the inconsistency that was bothering me, but the good sections were there, and most importantly, the good sections were there against good teams, which I think was definitely something that was encouraging for me. But it's really nice to see him show up here and just kind of destroy Call Me, who is a player that I really like, a prospect in the LCK that I think is very interesting to watch over the next couple of years. For Showmaker to just come in and dominate that series like he did, awesome stuff. The LeBlanc was phenomenal in game 1. The Kassadin was phenomenal in game 2. Everything you could ask for from him. Lucid was also great. This was easily his best series in the LCK since he has joined. It was better than anything he showed in week number 1. There were ups and downs for Lucid. I honestly wasn't super impressed with his week number 1. It felt like I was maybe expecting a stronger start from him. He was good, but maybe not great in week 1, even when they were winning. But this was a dominant performance. 2 games of Rel and 2 dominating games of Rel. 2 great engages towards the back half of game number 2 that ended up making it basically impossible for Nongshim to even try and play the game. That makes it very impressive. But if mid-jungle are going to have great chemistry, like that's what, created the Damwon success in the first place, with Showmaker being able to play off of some fantastic engages that his jungler was able to give him. It's just this time it's a young rookie in Lucid. It's going to be interesting to see if that keeps going. I think Kellen is phenomenal. It is really hard for me to watch Kellen and not see one of the best supports in the world. I understand that he wasn't great last year, but that was really the only bad year, and it wasn't even a bad year, but it was really the only meh year of his entire career, and outside of that, he's been one of the best supports in the world, and honestly, he started off this year in a really good spot. Him and Aiming seem to have great chemistry, but Kellen is so active on the map. His macro is clearly so good. He's always in the right spot at the right time. Really good to watch, and Aiming and Kingen were good as well. They just didn't really have to do nearly as much as Lucid, Showmaker, and Kellen did in this series. So credit to DK, and then not credit to Nongshim. I moved them into my top 6 last week because, truly, who's got that number 6 spot? I mean, genuinely, who would you have given it to after week number 1? Nongshim was the only team that looked even remotely competent in any of the series that they played, so I gave it to them. But it's not like I think this team is particularly solid or anything like that, and this series definitely ended up proving that it's a top 5 and a bottom 5, and Nongshim is still very much a part of that bottom 5. Call Me is going to get the dud of the series, completely outclassed in this one by Showmaker. I love Call Me. I think he's a very interesting mid lane player, but maybe I was a little bit too quick on the draw calling him, a top 6 or 7 mid laner in the LCK when he's barely played. I think he obviously has the potential to get there by the end of the spring split, but Showmaker's a different beast having to go up against him, and especially a motivated Showmaker who's looking like he's having a lot of fun in there with a lot of, teammates that I think he likes playing with. Call Me was just never going to be able to survive in that environment. The Ori, the Talia, none of it ended up working. Jiwoo was also really bad in this series. The positioning on the Senna and on the Aphelios way too far forward, constantly getting caught out by assassins and just never in a good spot. Sylvie did nothing, but honestly, he really wasn't that big of a problem here. Peter could not really do anything on the Milio, and the Seraphine was just in a position by the time where he was actually going to be a team fight threat that everything was just falling apart, especially in that game number 2, and Din Din is whatever on the top side. He's certainly not going to carry a game. It's just not really who he has been throughout his time in the LCK. This just felt like a good team playing a bad team, and sometimes that happens. It feels like a top 5 team playing a bottom 5 team, very similar to what we said about Hanwha versus FearX earlier in the week. This is kind of an expected outcome. I'm really not all that surprised. Nongshim still has some interesting things that I think they can show us, but I'm definitely, reconsidering their spot here in the top 6. And then for DK, I mean, they're a good team. I know they lost to KT Rolster, but, if they get better and better as the split goes on, which is all you can really ask for from a team like this that is starting to build some chemistry together, then I think they could be a team that competes for top 4. I think that's a very realistic thing to say out of them. I don't know if they're there right now, but this performance definitely gets them closer in my eyes. And then moving on to our second series of day 2, and it's another matchup between a pretty good team and a pretty bad team, 1 versus 10 in my power rankings. It was OK BRION taking on Gen.G, and unsurprisingly, Gen.G just outclasses them in a lot of different aspects. This was closer than some of the other series that we've seen in terms of best versus worst teams in the league right now, but you know, Gen.G was never in danger. There was never really an opportunity for Bro to win any of these games. Their mid game is atrocious. They have no sense of macro. And Gen.G is really good in that stage of the game. But at the very least, Bro was able to keep up in some of the laning phases. And so, you know, for that, you feel good. Gideon was all right in this series, and he has certainly been this team's best player to start the year, which I think is encouraging. But Gen.G is phenomenal. They beat T1 last week for a reason. This is, you know, one of the best teams in the world, the #1 team in the LCK at the current moment. Player of the series, pretty easy. Gonna go to Chovy, mostly for that game 1 on the Corki. Corki is one of those champions that at times looks kind of useless. Like, there are times where it's like, you know, I get that Corki's gonna take over in the late game once he gets there, but games are often spiraled out of control by the time that Corki wants to really start getting online, and it's like, why are teams prioritizing him as one of the #1 mid laners in the entire game? I mean, obviously he's got good parts, but do we really need to be prioritizing him on the same level as something like an Azir or, you know, an Akali or anything of that nature? Well, Chovy just showed what Corki can do in the right circumstance. This is one of the most dominant Corki games I've seen in a really long time. Chovy is Chovy. I mean, really, what do you want me to say? Every single year I get pushback for claiming Chovy's a very good player, and then every year he comes out and just bodies people who just aren't even half as good as him. This is best in the world shit. Like, there's really nothing else I can tell you. This guy's really, really fantastic. I don't think he's the best player in the world right now, but I certainly think he's in the conversation, and these are the performances that kind of live up to that. I think Lehens also has been spectacular to start this year. I think he's honestly been underratedly great to start this year. Not a lot of people are talking about him. You don't really see him being mentioned on social media alongside Chovy, alongside Keen, who I think have really been like the standouts, the stars of Gen.G so far. I think Lehens has been the second best player on this team behind Chovy, and I really like saying that. Lehens was somebody who, again, I caught some flack for in the offseason for ranking as high as I did, for ranking him as the #2, borderline #1 support in the region over someone like Delight. I don't think that that was a wrong decision. Lehens has been amazing for this team, in my opinion, even better than Delight was for portions of last year. Again, small sample size so far, so I don't want to overreact, but he's definitely passed the vibe check at the start of the year. He's been phenomenal on everything. Nautilus, Milio, he's been great on Nami, you know, whatever they need to play, like, he plays at a super high level. He can do a lot. He's obviously got his weird picks, but even outside of those, he's just one of the best supports in the world, and he continues to look like that. Keen was, again, very good in this series. He's basically unkillable when he gets to play tanks in the top lane, which is why I wasn't, you know, really all that concerned about, you know, the fit on this team. People were like, what's going to happen when Keen comes in and doesn't get as many resources? Well, he's great weak side, and he continues to be great weak side. Honestly, the only player that hasn't wowed me in a major way at the start of this year so far has been Canyon in the jungle, who I think has just been fine. I don't think he's been great. I don't think he's been bad either. I certainly don't think he has, you know, lost games or anything like that for Gen.G, but maybe you want to see a bit more out of Canyon, but he wasn't a superstar last year either, or even really in 2022. He stepped things up when things mattered the most, but he was another player I got pushback on, saying that I was a bit lower on Canyon than maybe consensus. I had him as my #3 jungler heading into the year, and people didn't like that very much. I think that's honestly proven to be relatively good so far, as he's just kind of been a passenger, not really a person pushing the team forward on Gen.G. We know he can unlock that. Again, small sample size. I don't want to be misconstrued or taken out of context like I'm saying that this is what's going to happen for the rest of the year. Canyon could still go on to win MVP if he dominates the rest of this split, and I wouldn't really be all that surprised, but at least so far this team looks pretty much exactly as I was predicting them to look, which is a good thing. And then for Bro on the other side, unfortunately, this is also kind of a good take for me, and I hate saying that because I wanted to be wrong about the idea of hating Bro's offseason so much, because I was so negative on them, and I honestly, walking away from some of those videos, I was like, do they really deserve for me to talk like this about them? Because I'm just so pessimistic. I didn't really see any upside in this team, and unfortunately, it just seems to have come to fruition. Now, the good thing is that Gideon actually seems to be pretty good. There were moments in this series where Gideon was just kind of doing more than Canyon was on the other side of the map. I really like what he's been able to do at the beginning part of this split, but that's it for, like, positives. Morgan can sometimes win, just not really against the top laners. He's going to be good enough to beat the bad top laners, and he's probably not good enough to beat the best top laners, and that's what Morgan is. And then the bot side of this map is miserable. Karis is whatever. Like, he'll win games, he'll lose games, but he'll lose most games. And then Envy and Effort are the worst bot lane. Now that Taiyun is gone, this is the worst bot lane in the LCK, and it's not close. Effort's going to get done of the series. You could give it to Envy as well. I lambasted this team for bringing Envy in as their big off-season addition, and this is why. This guy's just not a very good League of Legends player. Effort is also not an LCK caliber support support he hasn't been basically for the entirety of his career. I just don't really understand what this team sees in these two. The Senna game in particular in game 1 from Effort was awful. I mean, the dude just got erased from the map in every given opportunity. He was getting one-shot by Corky bombs and just walking in front of them. Like, I don't know what else you want to happen here. They're 0-6 for a reason. I understand that there were some laning moments here that made the team look all right, but I'm not sitting here saying that Bro is going to, overperform what they've done so far in this split. I think, we're seeing the version of Bro that we're probably going to get for the rest of the year unless there are some changes. There might be some interesting plays on the top side with players like Morgan and Gideon, but this team overall just can't compete with other teams in the LCK in terms of talent, and that's not just the top teams. I think it will be the bottom teams as well. But for Gen.G, still looking like the #1 team in the league. They beat T1 until proven otherwise. This is the best team in the LCK. Really like what they're able to do. Chovy and the Hens look amazing. Keen and Pays are great as secondary carries, and I'm sure Canyon will get into like mega form eventually. If he starts carrying some games, this team truly becomes Exodia and truly becomes one of, if not the scariest team in the entire world. But so far at the start of the year, they've done everything you could have asked them to do. And now moving on to our middle day of the week, day number 3 here, and we got to kick it off with probably the most prestigious rivalry in the LCK, the Telecom War between KT Rolster and T1, and as per usual, T1 is going to be able to come out on top in this one. Not a big upset or surprise here, but this was a pretty fun series. Well, I should say it was a pretty fun game number 1, a really fun game number 1 with a really nice comeback from KT, a really nice set of circumstances, great team fighting coming in from KT, but T1 just kind of said, you know what, we're just going to be better through the last 2 games of the series. We're not going to make this entirely interesting, and they're going to be able to come out on top in this one. That is an 0-2 week for KT Rolster. I normally wouldn't point that out, but I really, really think it would be funny if they just did the 2022 DRX thing all over again. If they went 2-0-0-2, 2-0-0-2. I think it would be hilarious to see that end up happening to KT Rolster. Who knows? Maybe it leads to them winning Worlds. Certainly worked for DRX, but there's some good and bad to talk about in this series for KT, but starting with T1, really nice to see the carry duo in particular of Faker and Gumayushi play really well in this series, especially towards the back half. Faker is going to get my player of the series, and man, really excited to say that. I was never truly worried about Faker, I want to make that abundantly clear, but he was not particularly good in week number 1 in both of their series, even in their win in the second half of the week. It didn't feel like Faker was actually playing all that well. Obviously, he was certainly outplayed by Chovy in the Gen.G series. That was just a little unfortunate, but it happens. Chovy's very good, but it's nice to see Faker get more resources and then really just dominate on them in this series and in this game too, in particular on the Corki. Again, a lot of examples in the LCK of Corki really starting to take over and dealing a lot of damage and being a big problem that teams just don't have easy ways to deal with. So, we're starting to see maybe why the prio on that champion is so high in a lot of the other regions. It's really just been the LCK that's been able to make it work, but the Orianna was obviously really good as well in game number 3. Gumayushi, I think, was also great, mostly in that game 3 on the Lucian. He's maybe the best Lucian in the world. Him and Ruler, like, 1A, 1B in terms of Lucian players. There's other players that are obviously very good at Lucian. I'm not trying to discount what, like, Viper can do on that champion, but these guys just play it so aggressive, and it feels like they do so much more damage than their contemporaries in that role on that champion, and it's really impressive. It's good stuff. Faker and Guma both having a very good series. Zeus, I thought, was really solid. He was really the one player actually playing well in game number 1 down the stretch on the Rumble, but again, he's on Rumble, so how much do you attribute to the champion? Zeus is still a really good player, though. Obviously, I'm not trying to, put him down at all. And then Owner and Keria were good, but I think this was Faker and Guma really stepping up and being the stars. Really, really nice to see Faker have a good series in this one. But for KT on the other side, again, some good and some bad to take away from this series. Game 1 was a lot of fun to watch. I think there were a lot of good things to say, mostly about Beryl, who I thought played really well in that game 1 on Alistair, was making a lot of very consistent, very phenomenal engages, setting up for the Kalista, and those two as a duo really were able to get that game 1 win on their own. Really nice to see Deft and Beryl honestly have better chemistry than they did in 2022. I mean, their laning phases weren't all that strong in 2022. Deft's laning stats were some of the worst of his entire career in that year, mostly because he was weak side almost every single game, but it's nice to see these two actually just winning isolated in 2v2 matchups when they do feel like they have an advantage to be able to capitalize on. So good from Beryl. The problem was that, 2023 Beryl returned in games 2 and 3. The Rakan in particular in game 2 was awful. This was one of the worst games of the split for anybody. It happens. It's Beryl. It's what he does. Like, I know people call him like LCK Hylissang, and while I understand kind of the idea behind that, I think they are very different players because a lot of Hylissang's ins come from like really good aggressive situations, not good situations, but aggressive situations. He's going for plays. He's trying to do something, whereas like Beryl just loses focus. Like, you can tell, like, in the middle of series, he just stops being as locked in. It's not as much of a problem when he gets to Worlds and gets to big stages, but in the regular season, especially, you know, random game on day 3 of week 2, like, you can just tell that sometimes he loses concentration and just makes a bad play in the middle of the game. He's done that the past 3 years. Really, ever since leaving Damwon, it's become kind of an issue for him. And, you know, he was good in game 1, but he's going to have to be better, you know, the rest of the series. He was a big reason why this team lost in the final 2 games. But my dead of the series is going to go to Pioshik in the jungle. This very much felt like a 2022, you know, DRX Pioshik performance in the regular season, where it's like, my guy, you just gotta stop. Like, eventually you gotta realize that you can't keep going in. You can't keep trying to make a play happen when your team is this far behind. Like, you need to group, you need to figure out where your win condition is. You're playing a Zira Felios in game 3, and this Xin Zhao is just constantly trying to dive in Orianna. It's just not gonna work, my guy. Like, I know he doesn't really have an off switch. I know that's what you get with Pioshik, but again, this is why I was lower on this team, is because they're going to have games where it's just like unwinnable because their brains are just not in it. That's always been the problem. That was the problem with 2022 DRX. Now, they got really hot down the stretch and things ended up working out. Not saying that can't happen for KT Rolster, but Perfect is not looking particularly great right now on the top side. BDD is good in the mid lane, but not elite. And while Deft is having good games, he's also having bad games. He's been very, you know, inconsistent, even in the same series over the course of this year, as we talked about earlier in the week against KDF. Very weird. A couple of good games, a couple of bad games. This team definitely deserves a little bit more investigation. Pioshik was player of the week in week number 1. He was amazing, but he's just not the kind of player that's going to give you that kind of output every single game. He has games like that all the time, but on a game-to-game basis, he's going to be a lot more volatile. So for KT, they're exactly what I thought they would be. They're going to be a really fun team to watch because they're going to make every game really aggressive and exciting in the same way that 2022 DRX did, but just like that team, they might be 500 going into the playoffs, and maybe they can go on a run, but I want to see how this team kind of figures itself out. You know, this was a tough week. T1 is not the easiest competition, but good for T1. Nice to be able to see them get another win. Obviously, you know, starting the year with a loss probably wasn't what they wanted, but being able to bounce back in a pretty good way over the next couple of series, I think, has looked solid. It's going to be interesting to see how they close out their week later on in the week, but at least for now, this is a nice win and an important one because you always want to win the Telecom Wars. And then moving on to our second series of day number 3 here, and it's 2 teams in the bottom half of the league. It's DRX taking on FearX. Kind of a funny way to put that. And FearX is going to be able to take the 2-1 series win. They are going to be able to come out on top in this one. They're the better team, and DRX has a lot of problems going for them right now. Honestly, I'm really not sure how this team is going to win a lot of games. Not because I think that everyone on this team is complete and utter garbage, but rather because I don't think they have anybody on the team that knows how to win games. I don't think they have a single person on this roster that knows how to actively generate their own lead without numbers advantages and knows what to do with it once they have it. Even the players that are mechanically good, most notably this bot lane, they don't do anything. They sit there and they wait for opportunities to come to them. I don't really know how DRX is going to win a game this split. This team is really not good. This is a really bad look for them. At least they won a game in this set. You know, we'll see how many, you know, they win over the course of this year, but Fox is better than them, and that should go to show you just how not good DRX is, because Fox is honestly not a particularly good League of Legends team, as we've seen throughout this year up until this point. It's their second win, but both of them are against the 2 worst teams in the league, in my opinion. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is maybe surprisingly going to go to Execute in this one. I think a lot of people are going to want to give this to Closer, and while I do understand that Closer in game 1 and 3, you know, we're both really good. The Yasuo in particular in game 3, really fun to watch. Even the Akali in game 1, he was really able to pop off, get onto some of the priority backline targets like the Senna very consistently, and, you know, really make fights a lot easier for his team, but I don't think any of those fights are nearly as easy if the Rakan is not setting them up, especially towards the back half of the game. Execute is just the best player on Fox. I think that has become abundantly clear, is that he is the best player on this team. You know, I think Willer is an interesting player. Closer is fine as a starter, but Execute is really the one that I think gives them upside in terms of being able to win games against teams that are better than them, and that's pretty fun to see. He's not always going to make the perfect play, but he's so aggressive and he's so willing to go out there and do something that it does put them in better situations than they would be in without him, and so, you know, really like him on this team. Always liked him in the LEC when he was playing for Astralis. It's really nice to see that he's carried a lot of that momentum over here so far to the LCK, and, you know, I'm just interested to see if he's going to be able to keep it up. But like I said, really nice stuff from Closer. If he didn't have that game number 2 on the Azir, I probably would have given him player of the series, but that game 2 was definitely a little bit more questionable, and I think Execute was honestly even a little bit more active in terms of their wins. But Closer, his best series of the year by far up until this point. Really nice to see him be able to take advantage of a rookie. I thought Willer was fine. Clear was fine. He was was definitely the better top laner. This is a concern because Rascal was supposed to be better here, and Clear is not a particularly good player in my opinion, but Clear was definitely better here. And then Henna did a great job of playing Xayah and capitalizing on recon setups and capitalizing when assassins would dive the backline. You know, you don't always have to be the most aggressive and most, you know, playmaking style of AD carry to do well on a champion like Xayah. You're going to win early in lane in a lot of these matchups, and you scale relatively well in that same vein. Just a very versatile champion that, even though she's not particularly in meta, is very easy to execute on at a pro level. So generally, I think Fox did everything they were supposed to do in this series, even if I still don't think that the outlook of this team has changed all that much. But man, DRX is just bad. Like, there is no other way to put it. This is just a bad League of Legends team in its current state. I know a lot of people are sitting here saying that, you know, oh, Rascal and Teddy are hard stuck. First of all, you're just not watching the games if you think Rascal's hard stuck. He's been one of the worst players in the LCK to start this year, and he was really bad in summer of last year as well. I just feel like his mental is gone, his confidence is gone. Obviously, mechanically speaking, this is a player who at times has been considered one of the best top laners in the world, somebody who's been a channel darling on this channel in the past, but I'm giving up on him. He's done of the series in this one. He got mega gapped by Clear in games 1 and 3, and especially in game 3, where it just was not close. Rascal has not looked even remotely like his old self at any point since joining DRX, and I'm just very concerned that he's just never going to get to that point again. I'm never going to say never for a player that's had the kind of talented career that he has had, but it certainly doesn't feel like it's in the cards right now. And I know a lot of people are going to look at Teddy and Pliata and say like, oh, they're solid players, and Pliata I kind of agree with. Pliata I think has a lot of upside. He's constantly kind of pigeonholed into playing Tom Kench on this team, and it's like, okay, well, maybe if he was able to do something a little bit more aggro, then perhaps he could, you know, offer a bit more to the team. But I constantly hear people say that Teddy is like elo held on these teams, and I'm gonna make the same argument on this channel that I make every single week, because there are people who are new and maybe haven't seen my analysis of Teddy. Teddy, mechanically speaking, is absolutely better than everybody else on this team, and, you know, he's really not somebody who makes a lot of mistakes, but the reason that Teddy always finds himself in this position of being on teams where he's playing all right and the rest of the team is just a disaster is because what Teddy isn't is proactive. What Teddy isn't is aggressive. What Teddy isn't is somebody that's going to win you games. He's going to look good when the rest of the team is looking good because he doesn't make mistakes, because he does capitalize when other people create advantages for him, because his positioning and his mechanics are solid, but the mentality that he plays with is just not conducive to being the best player on a team. Teddy can never be, you know, a best player on the team and actually win. We've seen it over the course of his career. It basically doesn't matter where he is. If the rest of the team is not setting Teddy up, then he's not the type of player to make a bad team better. He's just never going to do that. There are 80 carries out there that can do that, that are elite level, and Teddy is just not one of those. He is mechanically with them. He is not with them mentality-wise. It has just very much been proven. He didn't make any mistakes in this series. He was generally pretty good in this series, but you know what he also didn't do? Really anything in the games that they lost. Like the Varus, he was dealing damage in team fights, but, you know, team wasn't peeling for him. He ended up dying. I honestly think this was his best series of the year, so it kind of feels like a weird time to give this rant, but just generally, I think that he gets a little bit too much excuse for really just kind of being an okay AD carry, like an above average AD carry. He's not some elite AD carry, and it's really not surprising to once again see him on a bottom tier team. It's just kind of been the norm for him over the course of his career, and that's for a reason. But I do like Pliata. You know, Sponge is very out of his depth. Satab looked good in game 2 on the LeBlanc, but miserable in the first and the last game. And Rascal has been awful this split, so I don't really see a lot of upside for DRX. If your best player is Teddy, you're not going to win a lot of games. It just is what it is. And then for Fox on the other side, you know, they're still whatever, right? I still don't believe in them all that much. They've beaten Bro and they've beaten DRX. In my opinion, the two worst teams in the LCK at the current moment. I'm certainly not going to change my opinion on them. I'm glad Execute is looking good. Closer, I think, has been okay, and Willer's been okay to start this split. Clear has been really bad, but he looked good against Rascal, who's playing even worse, and Henna is just a guy in the bot lane, which is fine, but Fox is certainly not going to break any ground by beating DRX in this series, in my opinion. And now moving on to day number 4, and we kick day 4 off with the matchup that I think, at least player versus player, we never thought we would get to see at a pro level. It was Gen.G taking on Dplus KIA, and that means we get our first iteration of Canyon versus Showmaker. Very excited to see, you know, these two legendary teammates go head-to-head after Canyon left Dplus KIA in the offseason, going over to Gen.G. Well, I guess round 1 is going to go to Canyon, because Gen.G is going to pick up the 2-1 series win here, although it was not a walk in the park. DK played really well in this series, and it's crazy because I always feel like DK plays Gen.G super well, but Gen.G is 11-0 in their last 11 series against against Damwon. A crazy stat, something that is almost impossible to really comprehend with how, good Damwon has been over the past, 11 times that they've played, or Dplus KIA, or whoever it's been, whatever iteration of this organization that it's been. But, it's the truth. It's a real stat. It's crazy, but Gen.G is just on a different level. They were able to capitalize on some mistakes that DK, made. A lot of people think this could have been a 2-0 in favor of DK. They probably should have won game number 2, but in the end, they didn't win game 2, and then game 3 was all Gen.G, and so you got to give it to him. Player of the series for me is going to go to Lehens in the support position. Golly, he's so good. I get it. I get why people are lower on him, because I do understand, I'm usually the consistency guy, where I'm like, I got to see consistency. I got to see the game-to-game, but his peak is so good that honestly, I can live with the fact that not every single game he's going to be perfect, although every single game he is relevance. Like, you can definitely say that. I don't think he's barrel in terms of the good versus the bad. His bad is not nearly as bad as people say it is. He's just become a very well-rounded player, but man, his mechanics are just unreal for the support position. Dodging skill shots, constantly being in the right spot. His mental is very good. His macro is very good. He's reportedly become a better shot caller. And generally, Gen.G's macro as a team is immaculate, or at least it has been at the start of this split. Lehens, I think, is a big part of that. Whether he's playing something that is a little bit more aggro in terms of how you want to play it, like the Ashe, or you're playing Lulu, Milio, you're enabling, Ashe enables as well, like, obviously, but you can play Ashe a little bit more aggressive. Like, it doesn't matter. Lehens is just that good. That Milio game in game 3, his mechanics on Milio, his ability to dodge Aatrox Qs, it's actually absurd. He really is as good as advertised. And then, honestly, if you didn't want to give it to Lehens, I understand, because Canyon was really good in this series. I was talking about hoping to see a breakthrough performance from Canyon at some point in the near future. Well, we got it in this series against his former organization. He stepped up specifically on the Sejuani in game 3, where he just controlled the pacing of the entire game. Lucid, his replacement, just wasn't good enough to be able to keep up, and that really led to Gen.G generating enough tempo to just straight up win a lot of these fights. Pays was really good in a lot of these fights. His job is super easy right now, because Lehens and Canyon and Chovy and Keen are all playing at a crazy high level, but his mechanics are still fantastic. He has been phenomenal in this role, and Keen was amazing in game 2 on the Udyr. He was unkillable, completely dominating the late game team fights. He was the reason they won that second game. It's everybody that's pitching in. Chovy was probably the weak link of this team in this series, and he has been this team's best player through their first 3 series of the year. It's really a group effort for Gen.G, and I think that that is the best thing that you can possibly say. Everything is going right for this team. Obviously, there was a world in which they walked away with this, with the loss in this series, but the fact that they weren't able to do that, the fact that they came back in game number 2, stayed resilient, and then dominated game 3, that's crediting them. It's crediting their macro and their resilience. This is an elite team, one of the best in the entire world, right up there with T1 and Billy and JD Gaming. It's those 4, and truly, I think Gen.G has a conversation, at least after 2 weeks, to be at the top of all of them. And then for DK on the other side, they're really good. Like, this is a genuinely very good team. Like I said, there's a real world where they walk out with a 2-0 win over Gen.G in this series, which would have been massive. Showmaker was super good in these 3 games, specifically in game number 1. Aiming was awesome. Kellen was really good in this series, especially on that Rakan in game number 1. It just didn't end up building into something that was sustainable throughout the entirety of this series. Dud of the series for me is going to go to Kingen in the top lane, mostly for the Aatrox picks. He just wasn't very good on his signature champion in the back half of this series. He picked Aatrox with Rumble open, and he opted into that matchup, and it very much came back to bite this team. And at the end of the day, I was a bit concerned about Kingen at the beginning of the year. Not saying that, I was like, oh, they can't win because of Kingen, but, I would have had Kana higher than Kingen if Kana had stayed on this team as a top laner. I thought he had a better 2023 than Kingen did. I think Kingen's going to be fine. He's most of the time a really solid weak side top lane player, and I'm not concerned with this team's long-term future with him there, but he wasn't very good in this series, and Keen really made note of that in game 2, and Lehens made note of that in game 3. Lucid also, I think, definitely needed to be better down the stretch. It was really the rel engages at the end of game 2 that weren't very good, and he lost tempo instantly in game number 3 to Canyon. He was really good in game 1, so I want to cut him a bit of slack, but, some of the inexperience, I think, coming through towards the back half of this series. Either way, though, these are, straws that we are picking at. DK was actually very good in this series, and I think this does more to increase my confidence in this team than it does to decrease my confidence. They were are a couple of plays away from walking away with a win against one of the best teams in the world. This team is legit. They're playing at a high level right now, and I think they're very fun to watch. And then for Gen.G, they are one of the best teams in the world. Period. End of story. 4-0 start, or not. Like, this team is really, really good. Everybody on this team is playing at an elite level right now, and that really does lead to being one of the scarier, teams. I know I get kind of a bad reputation for being all in on Gen.G every year, but it's really hard not to be all in on this team when they're looking like the way they are right now. And then moving on to our second series of day number 4 here, and man, this was another good one. It was NS RedForce taking on the Kwangdong Freecs, and KDF is here to play. It's a 2-0 series win, and this team has solidified itself. If we were wondering whether or not a change in the bot lane would really change the outlook of this team moving forward, I think the answer to that question is right in front of us. Bull is here, and he is playing amazing. He genuinely was awesome in both of the 2 series that he played this week. There was no way anyone could have predicted that this would be such an instant impact from a player who, for all intents and purposes, had only been fine at the challengers level by basically everyone's account, including mine, over the past few years. For him to come in and not only just be a part of this team, stabilize the bot side, and allow the top side to win like I was kind of hoping that would happen here, but like genuinely be someone that they can play through in a very aggressive way and win them games is crazy. He was in the running for player of the series here once again in his second series this week, but he didn't get it. I'm going to give it to his bot lane partner in Ondil, who I think has also looked significantly better since Bull came in. The aggressiveness that he has shown is very, very intriguing. I'm not going to sit here and say that I think he could break out and really become a star support this year, but I mean, really, like, he looked like Kale in a series like this, former Live Sandbox support Kale, and that's something I'm very excited to say and very excited to see if it continues into the future. I think this could be a very fun bot lane because they really were the focal point for KDF, but if Ondil continues to play Senna and Renata and a lot of these enchanters at a pretty high level, this team obviously wanted to invest into him over someone like June, who they let go to the LEC. I think he could be pretty good. He's been pretty good since Bull came in. Both of the series that they played as a duo were very good, but Bull also was fantastic. On both the Seraphine and the Draven, talk about 2 contrasting playing styles. He can just kind of do a little bit of everything. The Draven game in particular in game number 2 was awesome. Ondil was definitely a little bit more noticeable on the Renata for being able to take over the whole map and for just making it so difficult to team fight with that crazy Renata ultimate, but Bull capitalized and really did a lot of good work on the Draven. Generally, this bot lane was incredibly strong this week, and I think that that is a major, major thing to say because the top side of this map is good. Cuz has been significantly better ever since this bot lane came in. He really wasn't all that good in week number 1, but he was a lot better here in week number 2, and I think that's a very encouraging sign. Definitely outjungled Sylvie in this matchup. If Cuz is playing even remotely the way he did for KT Rolster last year, alongside this bot lane, that's huge. Bulldog, I think, has taken some nice steps. He gapped Call Me in both of these laning phases, even as, Corky, which is not really supposed to happen, and Dudu is a rock on the top side of the map. This guy is phenomenal. He has been for a very long time, and I think he's going to get his recognition this year. KDF has become a very intriguing team basically overnight with the change of their bot laner, and I'm very excited to see where they go into the rest of the season. And then for Nongshim, I was really in on this team after week number 1, if only because everybody else surrounding them was a disaster. I said 6 through 8 was essentially the same team, and then the bottom 2 very much felt like the bottom 2. I kind of feel like that, but like Nongshim was very rich for number 6. Let's be entirely honest. 6 was rich for Nongshim, I would say. They're not that good, mostly because the player that I thought was really going to emerge this year as a really nice pick for Nongshim, or promotion, I guess, for Nongshim, and Call Me in the mid lane was just really bad this week. He's going to get dead of the series once again in this matchup against KDF. He made Azir look like the weakest champion on the planet. And to be fair to the LCK, basically everybody has lost on Azir this week. It's certainly something to monitor, but Call Me just did not have any sort of pressure or prio or anything in the mid lane. It was constantly being targeted down by Cuz. He was really bad in a lot of these team fights. He got outlaned as an Azir into Corky, and that's really bad. Like, that really should not happen. So Call Me definitely took a major step back. I still think he's a very interesting mid lane prospect. He was awesome in LCK Challengers. I want to give him some breathing room, allow him to potentially, go through some of the growing pains, but this week was pretty bad from him. I mean, he was one of the worst players in the LCK. I think if you're looking for positives, It's the fact that this bot lane is still pretty good. Jiwoo and Peter, definitely the strength of this team, which is why I still don't think they're like one of the worst teams in the entire league, is because I think at worst, Jiwoo and Peter are going to make things interesting. Sylvie is certainly not impressing me in his second year. He was okay in that series against DRX to start the year, but outside of that, he's just kind of been there. And Din, you know, he's been better than he was last year for sure, but do I believe he can break through and really make a difference in the top lane? I don't know, man. Like, I don't think he's doo-doo. Although it's always fun to see Dudu versus Din. Always a fun matchup. But, you know, in general, I think I just overrated Nongshim after one good win last week. I was way too quick to pull the trigger on a team that really has interesting pieces, but it really doesn't seem like it's coming together. I think they probably are closer to being the team I thought they were going to be at the beginning of the year than what I thought they were after week number 1. And then for KDF, this team is actually genuinely good in its current state. Is this going to be able to last? I don't know. Is Bull going to play like this the entire year? I don't know. But if this bot lane is legit, if they really can play through them consistently, I mean, topside's very good. This could be a genuinely dangerous team, not just a top 6 team, not just a team that makes playoffs, but a team you have to be scared of in the playoffs. And if that's what KDF ends up becoming after, you know, what they looked like in week number 1, talk about the biggest upgrade you could possibly get. And now moving on to our 5th and final day of LCK action here in week number 2, and we get a battle of the bottom teams. Always really exciting to see who's going to break their 0-win streak. It's DRX taking on OK BRION, and DRX is going to pick up their first win of the split. They're going to move to 1-3. Bro is going to move to 0-4. To start their split. Something had to give in a series like this. It did go to all 3 games, but DRX was definitely the better team, and I think we should have predicted that. That should have been obvious to anybody, you know, just looking at these two teams in terms of talent, but, you know, Morgan's a good player. There are times where Morgan's going to be able to win games like he did in game number 1 on the Yone. Unfortunately, it's just not enough to be able to do that over the course of an entire series. Good stuff from DRX, and I'm really excited to talk about this. Player of the series is going to go to Pliata in the support position, and man, am I excited to see this. I'm actually going to let you guys in on a little bit of a secret. I actually had planned to do a bit more content pieces in the offseason. I was really planning on doing maybe some deep dives into players I was interested in, players maybe I had a different opinion on, or players that I thought maybe not enough people were looking into. One of the really big topics that I wanted to cover was why Pliata was the most interesting LCK rookie going into this year for me. Why I thought this guy was a superstar in the making. Why his tape in challengers was just consistently super good no matter what he was doing as an AD carry or a support. He just felt like a star, and, you know, I never got around to making the video. I feel really bad about doing that because it kind of feels empty now that I'm saying it in a video like this, but, you know, this is what I saw, right? This is a superstar support. This is not just a good support player. This is a guy that you can put on one of the top teams. Maybe not now, but certainly in a year. And, you know, I could really expect him to be a game changer at that level. This guy is so good, even when the rest of the team around him isn't playing particularly well. And he's at a position where that's usually very difficult to do. It's very difficult to look at a position like support and see the good when the rest is going bad. But Pliata has been awesome this split, and he's been the best part of this team, no question. He's elo held here on DRX, more so than Teddy, more so than Rascal. I think Pliata is the one elo held here, but, you know, awesome series from him. His Tom Kenshin game 3 was phenomenal, but he was great in game 2 on the Bard, making a lot of those plays as well. He's just an amazing support, really good stuff. Teddy did a good job of capitalizing, but like I said, Teddy needs setup. Pliata gave him a ton of setup in this series, so credit to him. So did Rascal in game number 2, which we will talk about, but Teddy did a good job, especially on the Varus and the Jinx, to really be able to capitalize and just make a lot of this work. Rascal had his best game of the split by far in game number 2 on the Gnar. Worth noting that he almost solo lost game number 1. I shouldn't say almost solo, because Sponge was miserable on the Lee Sin as well, but Rascal was awful in game number 1 on the Aatrox. The Yone just got so far ahead of him, and Morgan single-handedly carried that game number 1 for Bro, but outside of that, Rascal was much better in game 2 and then was still pretty good in game number 3. Really nice to see him at least have a couple of good games here, and against a pretty decent top laner in Morgan, even if he did kind of get dumpstered in game number 1. Still worried about the rookies. I think Satab has more, like, interesting traits. I think he's been able to survive a bit more. He was better than Karis specifically in game 3 when he was playing the Akali in this series, but Sponge just looks completely out of his depth, whether it's on aggressive picks like the Lee Sin or enablers like the Sejuani. It doesn't really matter. None of it's really working for him. I'm very concerned. He's pretty clearly the worst jungler in the LCK right now, and that's at least something to monitor. I think this team can win games without him, as we saw here. Maybe not against genuinely good teams, but against Bro, like, they can win without him, but most of that is because bot lane really was so good. Pliata is is so good. I'm so excited to see what this guy's career looks like because I genuinely think he could be a star. And then for Bro on the other side, they're just not very good. Like, this is the worst team in the league. I was telling you guys in the preseason, I'm telling you now, this team sucks. I don't really see an avenue for them to win games. Morgan mega carried game number 1, and the Magic kind of fell off after that, and there's nobody else in this team that can do anything. Who do you want to give Dead of the Series to? It doesn't particularly matter. I would give it to Jungle Mid here, one of them. I'm going to give it to Karis because I thought the Azir in Game 3 was the most bad game. I think the Akali in Game 1, he was the worst performing member on his team, and he was okay in Game number 2 on the Ori. He certainly didn't make any major mistakes, but he also wasn't particularly good in any of those fights. Gideon was a lot more active. He made a lot more bad plays, but I think he also made a lot more good plays for the team, and so it's really however you want to calculate that. I gave it to Karis, again, because I thought his Game 3 was worse, but again, if you wanted to give it to Gideon, it's whatever. This bot lane is the worst in the LCK. I think that is very obvious at this point. Teddy and Pliata made them look like absolute scrubs in the back half of this series. Envy just doesn't do anything, and Effort really is also just super inactive on the map, and when he does try to make plays, they do not work out. This is a bad bot lane. This is a bad team. I feel bad for Morgan because he's a good player. He's not a great player, but he's a good player, and he's stuck on the worst team in the league. And then Gideon is interesting. He at least is trying to do things, but the bottom side of this team, Karis, Envy, and Effort are just non-LCK players. I think that has become very clear at this point. So Bro moving to 0-4, DRX moving to 1-3. It is very clear that they're not the worst team in the league, which is a good thing, but they're going to need to build on this. This is a good confidence builder, and I'm still very worried about the mid-jungle of this team, the top side of this team just in general, but if Pliata is as good as I think he is, I think he could make a lot of these series a lot more interesting, even with teams like, Fox around them, Nongshim around them, in the, in the zone of these bottom 4 teams. Definitely going to be interesting to see what happens to DRX, but at least they got a win here. And that brings us to our final series of the week here in week number 2, and it was a pretty good one to end the week off. It was Hanwha Life Esports taking on T1. And T1 is going to pick up the 2-0 series win in pretty dominant fashion. Really good stuff. Nice bounce back from T1. We've been talking about how the league feels a lot closer to being a top 3 than maybe it has in the last few years, where it's really been a top 2. It's been T1 and Gen.G just really going head-to-head, and everybody else just trying to catch up. It felt like Hanwha could potentially be the team that breaks through this year. Unfortunately, at least in this series, it was not meant to be. T1 did a much better job of being able to really capitalize on a lot of the advantages that they were able to generate for themselves. Their players individually were just better in a lot of different areas, and that means that they were able to come out on top. I still see a lot of overreaction coming their way, or, generally coming the way of Hanwha Life fans and team players and things like that I want to dispel. A lot of negatives being thrown at Zeka, 2 bad games of Corki, and certainly I'm not going to sit here and try to defend these 2 games, but some grand statements being thrown out, and I think generally this is something that I get pretty frustrated by, is just these big, long-term, big-picture statements that don't really have any credibility, that you look at 2 games and you're like, this backs up my bias, and so I'm going to make a big, grand statement about it on social media. I think a lot of that happens to certain players that are kind of predispositioned to be disliked by the community, Zeka being one of them, and I'll get into that more so when we talk about Hanwha Life. But for T1, great series here. I think it can happen the opposite as well. I think a lot of it happens to T1 players in the opposite way, where confirmation bias tends to give you a lot of good ideas of players that are the best in the world, even when they're not always the best in the world. That being said, Zeus is awesome. Certainly didn't mean anything by that, I say with a wink on my face, but Zeus was really good in this series. He was really good on 2 games of Yone. Pretty ridiculous to allow him to have this champion in back-to-back games. We know he's just going to beat you on Yone. Like, that's just something that you have to know is going to happen, and he was awesome in this series. Really did gap Doran. This is really the first time that these 2 have gone head-to-head, and Zeus has actually performed super well in a series like this. Maybe it's, it takes him getting his signature champion in the top lane for something like that to happen, but at the end of the day, it did end up happening, so credit to T1, credit to Zeus. This was a really good series, and he's had a very good start to the year, with the exception, kind of that series against Gen.G, but he's still pretty good in that series against Gen.G. Zeus has been awesome. I make jokes because people in the comment section seem to think I hate him. I really don't hate him. Faker was phenomenal in this series. Mega gapped Zeka in both of these games. Got to play 2 very advantageous lane matchups, most specifically the Nico and Corki. I'm not really sure how you allow that in the drafting period, but Orianna as well is very good, and generally Faker just outplayed Zeka in both of these series. We've seen the Corki actually do very well in the LCK. Faker was not going to allow that to happen in this series. Great week in general from Faker, which I think was very important, because like I said earlier in the week when talking about T1, Faker was kind of the weak link of this team in week number 1, when they really didn't look as dominant. Really nice to see that that was just, you know, a couple of games. You know, it's low sample size, high variance. It just is what it is. Good to see Faker bounce back here. Owner was really good in the series. Loved his ability to play that Nocturne in game number 1. Really not a huge fan of Nocturne Nico. I say it a bunch on this channel, but when really good players play it, you can kind of see the idea behind it. Usually it's just because the players are better that it executes very well, but Faker getting a giant lead in the mid lane certainly didn't hurt. And then Guma and Kyria continue to look very nice. You know, marksmen in the support position aren't new anymore, especially for Kyria, but the Ashe looked very good in game number 1. So generally, just a nice series for T1, for them to be able to so cleanly be able to take down a team like Hanwha Life that was undefeated, not only in series score, but in game score going into the series. It's a nice thing. Hanwha Life getting tested for the first time and not being able to come out on top, certainly pretty telling. And Zeka getting done in the series is certainly something to keep an eye on. He is certainly the most volatile player on this team. That I'm certainly not going to deny. I've said certainly 17 times in the last 10 seconds. But outside of that, you know, Zeka's a very interesting player to talk about. You're going to see him have this one bad series, and then all these people are going to say, oh, he's so meta-reliant. Oh, we can only play the melee carry assassins. Oh, he was always going to be the weak link of this team. He's always going to hold them back, yada, 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 etc., right? He was amazing in their first 3 series. No one's going to talk about that. He was really good last year, and everybody likes to pretend that he wasn't. I don't really know why. Like, even going back and watching his tape in the offseason, this dude was just outclassing even good mid laners in a lot of sections of the year. He had 2 bad games. It happens. Faker had a lot of bad games in week number 1. You didn't hear anybody proselytizing about him, you know, being this miserably bad mid laner who's super meta dependent. It's a weird statement to make. Do I think Zeka's as good as Faker? No, but I think Zeka deserves a lot more respect than he gets generally. I think people are just waiting for him to play poorly. He plays well in 90% of his series, but the 10% of the series that he doesn't play well in, the entire comment section of every game and any post-match thread is just shitting on Zeka. It's just, I guess, the reality of living in a world where he was really good in 2022 and people didn't like that. So I don't really know. I can't explain it. I don't know why people don't like Zeka. I love this guy as a player. He's super fun to watch, and he had 2 bad games here. You're going to live with that because he gives you a lot more good than he does bad. Doran was also really bad in this series. That's not going to come up a lot, because Doran, I think, has a much better opinion with the fan base. Zeus just mega gapped him. Yes, he got to play, you know, 2 games of Yone, but those 2 games of Yone looked really freaking good, and Doran just couldn't keep up. Viper and Delight were pretty solid. I think Delight could have done a lot more on the Rakan in game number 1 to actually make things interesting. He was so passive, so scared to really make any play into the enemy team. Really wanted to see more out of him. And Peanut was kind of in a similar way. Like, I wanted to see more aggressiveness. That's something that Peanut in particular has struggled with sometimes over the course of his career, specifically into very aggressive teams like T1. Again, just something to monitor. I'm not trying to say that this team is a disaster, but this was probably not the first big test that you wanted to see from Hanwha. You probably wanted to see them be a bit more competitive in a series like this. Long season, it's only week 2, it's still their first loss of the entire year. You're going to cut them a little bit of slack, but it's really not the 2 games that I think you were looking for against T1. And for T1, it feels like they bounced back pretty well since that loss to Gen.G at the beginning of the season. They've done basically everything in their power to get back on track, and it feels like everybody is at the very least playing well right now. Zeus and Faker played really, really well this week, and I think Guma also had a very quietly great week for T1, which is very good to say. Obviously, all of this is going to lead up into, you know, them and Gen.G really being the top 2 teams in the league, and we're going to get this repeat, but hopefully they can reverse history and actually, you know, start to take some LCK titles from here on out. Alright, but that is going to do it for my Week 2 LCK overview and analysis video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Of course, up on the screen, the updated LCK standings after 2 weeks of games. Any ties will just be broken alphabetically. We've only got 1 tie in terms of both series and game score, which is pretty good after 2 weeks of action. Certainly pretty different than what we've had in years past, but certainly not something I'm going to complain about. Of course, up on the screen to the right of all of the teams, in the first column, you're going to see my personal power ranking of all of the teams from 1 to 10. In the second column, you're going to see how that has changed from last week to this week. We can go over the risers and the fallers, but honestly, not a lot of changes after week number 2. Top 5 are all going to stay the same, at least for now. I often take a wait-and-see approach with a lot of these teams, and I certainly don't think I saw enough this week to really feel comfortable saying that these teams need to be moved into a different order. It's still Gen.G at 1 and T1 at 2 because they're clearly the 2 best teams in the league, and Gen.G was able to beat T1 in week 1. Hanwha Life is still going to stick at 3 because I think I would still take them over a team like DK or KT even after the T1 series. And DK and KT are kind of fighting it out. DK looked better this week, but KT beat them last week, and so I don't really want to make any big changes, but Really, the only changes come at the number 6 spot, Nongshim dropping down to 7, Fox dropping down to 8, and KDF jumping up to number 6. They are clearly the best of the rest right now, especially with Bull in there at AD carry. He definitely looks like a big upgrade, and bot lane in general looked really strong this week. Topside was already a big positive for them. I think this could be one of the scarier teams in all of the LCK. Like I said, very worthy of jumping up to number 6. The reason Nongshim doesn't fall down further after a pretty horrendous week, even with Fox winning a game, is because I genuinely don't think Fox is a better team than Nongshim at the current moment. I think Nongshim has more upside, even if I don't think they're as consistent as a team like Fox might be against bad teams. DRX and Bro are very clearly the 2 bottom teams in the league. They stay at number 9 and at number 10, respectively. But then moving on to Player of the Week and Dud of the Week, this is also a very fun segment to talk about because, yes, my Player of the Week in Week 2 of the LCK is Bull, the AD carry for the Kwangdong Freecs. I am also surprised that he's getting this because, honestly, I'm really not giving it to him just because of the narrative or the storytelling. I honestly think he was the most valuable player to his team in Week 2. I think obviously you see the difference from before and after, but his contributions in those games were massive. Like, he was the focal point in every game that they played, and they went undefeated this week. So you really got to give a lot of credit to Bull. He was really, really good for KDF. The runners-up, my honorable mentions here, Faker from T1. I mean, come on, Faker had an amazing week, was really good. I think you could give this to Zeus as well. Whoever you thought had a better week on T1, Faker or Zeus. I try to split it up between teams, but both of them are honorable mentions. And then Lehens, the support for Gen.G. He was the best player on Gen.G this week. They continued to go 2-0. They continued to look good, and Lehens continued to be one of the best supports in the entire league. Those were the 4 players that I really wanted to shout out for Player of the Week, and unfortunately, Dud of the Week for me, it's going to go to Call Me, the mid laner for Nongshim. I was really praising this guy after week number 1. I love his Challengers League tape. But honestly, week 2 was really bad from him. He got gapped in all 4 games that he played this week. Nongshim in general looked very bad in all of their games this week. They dropped down to 9th in the standings. A lot of that is Call Me just not really being able to perform at a big level. I still believe he can be really interesting, and I think give him time, and he'll be a lot more comfortable playing against some of the better mid laners in the LCK, but at least for week number 2, he is going to come in as my Dud of the Week. But let me know what you guys think of all of that, the power rankings, the Player of the Week, the Dud of the Week, all of it down in the comment section below, and let me know if you enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like. It really does mean a lot. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LCK on this channel. We post about all 4 of the major regions, as well as the NACL every single week on this channel, and so if you're interested in comprehensive overviews of basically everything going on in LoL Esports right now, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe, hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you are having a great day. Hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.